The boy wasn't moving. That was the first thing Laine noticed when she cut through the alley behind St. Clair Station. A kid, maybe 9 or 10, slumped against the chain-link fence with his backpack twisted under him and one knee bleeding through his uniform trousers. Snow had already started collecting on his shoulders like he'd been there a while. She knelt beside him without thinking. That was just who Laine Whitford was, the kind of person who knelt. "Hey," she touched his cheek. "Warm, thank God." His eyes fluttered. "You with me? What happened?" He tried to sit up and winced hard. "Fell off the fence," he managed. "I can't, my ankle." She looked at it, already swelling inside the shoe. Okay, that's okay." She unzipped her jacket and draped it over him, ignoring the January air on her arms. "Do you have a phone?" He shook his head. "Parents' number? My dad." He hesitated, the way he said it, like the word carried weight. I don't know if he'll pick up. That's fine." "What's the number?" He recited it slowly. She dialed. It rang twice. "Who is this?" Not a question, a demand, flat and controlled, the voice of someone who had not been surprised in a very long time. "My name is Laine Whitford. I'm at the alley behind St. Clair Station on Yonge. I found a boy. I think he's your son. He fell and he can't put weight on his ankle. He's conscious and he's warm, but he needs someone here." A pause. 3 full seconds. "Don't move him." The line went dead. She stared at her phone. Then she looked at the boy who was watching her with dark, steady eyes that were too old for his face. "He's coming," she said. "Yeah," the boy said quietly. "He always comes." The man who arrived 8 minutes later did not look like someone who took the subway. He came on foot from the south end of the alley, and he walked like the pavement belonged to him. Long strides, coat open despite the cold, and 2 men behind him who stopped at the mouth of the alley without being told to. Laine registered all of this in about 4 seconds and made herself stay very still. He dropped to one knee beside the boy with an ease that surprised her. All that authority folded up small, Bastien. His hand went to the boy's face. Something shifted in his expression, fast, almost invisible, like a window opening and closing. "What did you do?" "Tried to take the shortcut." The boy, Bastien, gave a weak grin. "Fence was icy, the fence." The man said it like he was filing the information somewhere to deal with later. Then he looked up at Laine. She'd been looked at before. She worked the floor at Calloway's Catering, events, galas, private dinners for people who didn't look at the staff, so she was used to being invisible. This was different. He looked at her like she was a fact he needed to account for. "You called," he said. His number was in his planner. Front pocket. She nodded at the backpack. "I checked for ID first." "You checked for ID?" "I wanted to make sure I was calling the right person." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "And if I hadn't been? Then I'd have called 911 and waited with him anyway." He studied her for another moment. Then he stood, and she stood too, and he was taller than she'd clocked from the ground, somewhere around 6'2", with the kind of face that had probably been called handsome so many times it had stopped meaning anything to him. "Ronan Vael," he said. She shook his hand. His grip was brief and firm, and he let go exactly when he should have. "Laine Whitford." "You're cold," he said, and it wasn't a question or a concern. Just an observation stated plainly, the way he'd probably state anything. Her jacket was still around Bastien's shoulders. "I'm fine." Ronan Vael looked at her for one more second. Then he turned and crouched again and lifted his son, just lifted him, clean and careful, and said something low to the boy in what sounded like French. Bastien leaned his head against his father's shoulder like he'd done it 1,000 times. One of the men at the mouth of the alley had already pulled out his phone. Laine retrieved her jacket from Bastien's shoulders, said goodbye to the boy, who said thank you, Laine, with a seriousness that made her chest ache a little, and walked back to the main street to catch her bus. She had a shift at 6. She didn't think about it after that. She didn't have the space. Her mother, Celia, had been doing the crossword in bed when Laine got home that night. A good sign, a good brain day. But by Thursday she'd had 2 bad spells, and the pharmacy called to say the insurance had lapsed again, and the medication that cost $40 a month was now going to cost $312. Laine sat on the edge of the bathtub and did the math in her head 3 times, and got the same answer every time. Not possible, not without dropping something else. She dropped the internet first. Then she picked up a second catering shift on Saturdays, the ones that ran until 2 in the morning for corporate dinners in the financial district where nobody made eye contact with her, but everybody expected their wine glass to always be full. She was fine. She had always been fine. That was Laine's particular talent, appearing fine so convincingly that sometimes she believed it herself. 3 weeks after the alley, she was working a private dinner on the 42nd floor of a King Street tower. Black tablecloths, orchid centerpieces, 17 guests who represented somewhere north of $4 billion between them, when she came around the corner with a tray of amuse-bouche and nearly collided with Ronan Vael. He caught the tray before she did, not the tray, her wrist, steadying her, and the tray stayed level. She looked up, he looked down. The same flat attention as before, like he was noting the coincidence without being particularly moved by it. "Laine Whitford?" he said. "Mr. Vael." She took the tray back, adjusted her grip, and kept moving. Behind her she heard him say nothing at all, which was somehow louder than if he had. At the end of the night, when she was collecting glasses from the far end of the room, he appeared beside her. "How's your ankle?" he asked. She blinked. "My ankle's fine. It wasn't my ankle." "I know. I meant Bastien. Force of habit." A pause. "He's fine. Sprain, not a break. He asks about you. That's sweet. He wants to know if you like hockey. He's 9 and he's already trying to make friends for his father." "That's," she stopped herself. "Efficient?" Ronan offered. "I was going to say something less complimentary." The corner of his mouth did the thing again. "I know." She looked at him properly for the first time that evening. Really looked, instead of cataloging. He had the careful stillness of someone who'd trained himself out of restlessness, but there was something underneath it. Something that hadn't quite settled. "Is there something you need, Mr. Vael?" She kept her voice professional. She was working. "There's a position," he said. "Coordinator. For a private events company I hold a stake in, Belhaven Group. You'd oversee client dinners, venue negotiations, the kind of thing you're clearly—" "No." He stopped. "No," she said again more evenly. "Thank you. I'm good where I am." He looked at her like this was genuinely new data. "The salary is, I'm sure it's good." She picked up 2 more glasses. "Good night, Mr. Vael." She walked away. Her hands were perfectly steady. She thought about it on the bus home. She thought about it in the way you think about something you've already decided against, circling it, checking the decision, putting it down again. She didn't want to owe him anything. That was the whole of it. She'd done something ordinary and human in that alley, the kind of thing anyone would have done, and she did not want it turned into a transaction. Ronan Vael was the kind of man who collected debts, even the ones he reframed as generosity. She could see it in the way he moved through a room, like he was already several steps into a calculation everyone else hadn't started yet. She was not going to be a calculation. What she didn't account for was Bastien. The boy started showing up on Saturdays. Not at her apartment, she'd never told him where she lived, but at the catering company's loading dock on Adelaide, where she sometimes signed for supply deliveries on weekend mornings. He came with a book under his arm the first time, sat on the concrete steps like he belonged there, and said, "Dad doesn't know I'm here," so immediately that she knew it was at least partially a lie. "Bastien, I just wanted to say thank you properly. You left before I could. I said goodbye. That's not the same." He opened his book, apparently settling in. He was reading something dense for a kid. She tilted her head and saw it was a biography of René Lévesque. "I won't bother you." He didn't bother her. That was the maddening thing. He sat and read and occasionally asked her a question about her job or the city, or once with great seriousness, whether she thought a person could be good at their job and also secretly not very good at other things. She said she thought that was most people. He seemed satisfied. She asked, the 3rd Saturday, how he'd gotten across the city alone. "Dad's driver dropped me," he said, and turned a page. "So he knows." Bastien considered this. "He knows I'm somewhere," Sat's on answer. "I know." He smiled, quick and sideways, and she recognized the expression, the particular shape of it, from his father. "He says if you won't take the job you should at least let me come visit. He says I need to be around people who don't agree with him all the time." She sat down on the steps beside him. "Does many people agree with him all the time?" "Everyone," Bastien said, with the world-weariness of a small person who had observed a great deal. She looked at this child, serious, old-eyed, entirely comfortable, occupying space, and thought, of course he sent the one person she couldn't turn away. "Tell your father," she said, "that I'm not a management project." Bastien pulled out his phone and typed that verbatim and pressed send. 3 seconds later a reply came through. He tilted the screen so she could see it. "Tell her neither is she." She read it twice. Then she laughed, actually laughed, the involuntary kind, and Bastien looked pleased with himself in exactly the way his father never allowed himself to be. She agreed to one dinner. That was how she framed it to herself. One dinner, the way you agree to one coffee with someone you're not sure about, just to see. The restaurant was quiet and not showy, a small Quebecois place on Harbord with low lights and paper menus, and she registered with some grudging approval that he had not taken her somewhere designed to impress. He was already at the table when she arrived, which she appreciated. She hated waiting. He stood when she came in. She said, "Don't." He said he was raised by a woman who would have appeared in a vision to correct him if he didn't, and she sat down. They ordered. He asked about her work. Not politely, but specifically. What parts she was good at, what she found boring, how she'd ended up in catering. She found herself answering honestly, which she hadn't planned on. "I'm organized," she said, "and I'm good at reading rooms." Events work made sense. Reading rooms, he repeated, knowing when something's about to go wrong before it does. Who's upset, who's performing, who's actually in charge of any given situation regardless of their title. She shrugged. "It's useful." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you read in this room?" She looked around the restaurant. The older couple by the window who hadn't spoken in 20 minutes but kept touching each other's hands. The table of 4 where one woman was doing all the talking and the others were waiting her out. The waiter who was behind on his section but hadn't asked for help yet. "The couple by the window are comfortable," she said. "The 4 women are celebrating something that matters more to one of them than the others. The waiter should ask his colleague to take table 6. Ronan Vael looked at her with something that was not quite admiration and not quite evaluation, but existed in the space between them. "What about this table?" he asked. "This table," she said, "has one person who is used to being the most prepared person in the room, and one person who is trying to figure out his angle. And I haven't decided what it is yet." He nodded slowly like she'd confirmed something. "Most people assume they know the angle," he said. "They project a motive and then they see the motive everywhere. I know. I've worked for people like that. Have you worked for people like me before?" "I don't work for you." "No," he said. "You don't." She told her mother about him 2 weeks later. In the indirect way, she told her mother everything she wasn't sure about, framing it as a funny story, a coincidence. The boy in the alley, and then the dinner, and then the fact that Bastien had now shown up 5 more times and taught her something about hockey she hadn't asked to know. Her mother, who had her good days and her bad days, and who had been managing the good-to-bad ratio with medication that Laine had been supplementing with a second job for 7 months without saying so, listened to all of it and then said, "You like him." "I don't know him." "You like the idea that he's more complicated than he looks." "I'm not saying it's wrong." Her mother folded the newspaper in her lap. "I'm saying you should tell him about the pills, not because you should take anything from him. Because people who are interested in you should know what you're carrying." Laine was quiet. "You never let anyone carry anything with you," her mother said, not unkindly. "You think it's strength. Sometimes it's just lonely." She didn't tell Ronan about the medication. Not yet, but she told him something else. 3 nights later, when he called to ask if Bastien had been tolerable that afternoon, and she said yes, and then, before she'd decided to, said, "He told me you're having trouble with someone on your board." A pause. "Did he?" He said, "A man named Stroud has been feeding information to a competitor." His words. Longer pause. "Bastien is 9. Bastien is 9, and he listens extremely well, and he trusts you, which is why he told me, because he said you wouldn't talk to anyone about it, because you don't want anyone to think you didn't see it coming." The silence on the line was different now. Not the controlled quiet of before, but something thinner, more exposed. "How long ago did he tell you this?" Ronan asked. 3 weeks ago. I sat on it because I wasn't sure it was my place. And now? Now I think if you don't deal with Stroud directly in the next few days, you're going to walk into that Thursday meeting and make a decision based on bad information, and whatever happens after that will be worse than just confronting him. She heard him exhale, slow and deliberate, the sound of a man recalibrating. "How?" he said. "Do you know that?" "Because he was at the event on King Street 3 weeks ago. I noticed him watching you the entire night, not you, your reactions. He was clocking what moved you." Another silence. "You noticed that," Ronan said. "I notice everything, I told you. It's what I'm good at." He dealt with Stroud. She didn't ask how, and he didn't tell her, which she appreciated. She had enough to carry. But the Thursday meeting apparently went differently than it would have, and the week after, Ronan showed up at the Adelaide loading dock himself. He looked mildly absurd, standing there in a coat that cost more than her monthly rent, hands in his pockets, watching her sign a clipboard. "You could have called," she said. "I could have." He waited while she finished. "Bastien said you're working Saturdays because of a coverage gap on your mother's prescription." She went very still. "He overheard you on the phone. He's 9 and he listens extremely well," she said. Her voice came out flatter than she meant it to. "Laine, no." She handed the clipboard back to the delivery driver and waited until he'd driven off. "I know what you're going to say, and the answer is no. What happened with Stroud? I didn't do that for a trade. I did it because it was the right call. What I have going with my mother isn't. I know you don't need it. His voice was careful, not gentle, exactly, but precise, like he was choosing each word the way you choose footing on ice. I'm not offering you a transaction. I'm offering you what I'd offer anyone I. He stopped. She waited. Anyone I wanted to keep in my life, he finished. Which is different. The loading dock was cold and gray and not a romantic setting by any conventional measure. A pigeon was doing something irritating near the dumpster. Somewhere down the alley, a delivery truck was backing up with that beeping sound that existed purely to be annoying. You can't just decide to keep someone in your life, she said. I know. That's why I'm asking. She looked at him. The controlled stillness, and underneath it, the thing that hadn't settled. She could see it more clearly now. It wasn't restlessness. It was the specific held-breath quality of a person who was used to being the one who waited to be needed, and was not sure what to do with wanting to be wanted instead. The medication coverage, she said slowly. If I said yes, it wouldn't be a gift. It would be a loan, and I'd pay it back, and you'd accept those terms. Yes, and you wouldn't use it as leverage, Laine. Something in his voice shifted. I have never once used kindness as leverage. I'm not that man. She believed him. She was surprised that she believed him, but she did. Okay, she said. He nodded. Then is that okay to the loan, or okay to something larger? I'm still deciding about the larger. She picked up her bag. Come for coffee. There's a place 2 blocks over. Bastian's already there. He texted me when you got out of the car. Ronan closed his eyes briefly. He's going to be insufferable about this. He's already insufferable. He's 9 and he reads political biographies. His mother was the same way. He said it evenly, without flinching, and she understood it was something he'd learned to carry quietly. Tell me about her sometime, Laine said, if you want. He looked at her. Not today, she added. Sometime. Sometime, he agreed. The coffee shop was warm and too small, and Bastian had already ordered a hot chocolate and claimed the corner table with his coat spread over 2 chairs. He looked up when they walked in together. The expression on his face was the most unguarded thing Laine had ever seen from anyone in that family. Pure, uncomplicated satisfaction, the specific joy of a child who has correctly solved something the adults around him couldn't. I didn't do anything, he said immediately. You absolutely did something, Laine said. Several things, Ronan said. Bastian picked up his hot chocolate. You're both here, though. He had a point. She sat down across from him and stole one of the chairs he'd saved with his coat, and Ronan sat beside her. Not across, beside, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold she'd carried in from outside, and ordered a coffee without looking at the menu the way a person orders something in a place they intend to come back to. Outside, the snow had started again, the kind of quiet, steady snow that settled over the city like it had nowhere better to be. Laine wrapped both hands around her mug and didn't say anything for a moment, just let the warmth come through. Across the table, Bastian was already reading.